Sometimes, the most expensive seat in the room is reserved for the person everyone came to laugh at. The ballroom shimmered beneath layers of crystal light, each chandelier scattering warm gold across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the front of the hall, their music floating above the quiet conversations of nearly 200 guests gathered for what many called the wedding of the year. Men adjusted tailored tuxedos. Women lifted champagne glasses beneath arrangements of white roses that seemed to stretch endlessly across the room. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked carefully planned. And in a way, it was. Near the front row, just 3 seats away from the bride's family, a small ivory card rested against a velvet chair. The elegant black lettering read one name. Claire Whitmore. Several guests noticed it as they entered. Some exchanged curious glances. Others smiled knowingly. A few even whispered. They all remembered the story. Ryan Bennett's ex-wife. The woman he left behind. The woman nobody had seen in years. At the center of the ballroom, Ryan stood confidently among friends, greeting guests as if he owned the evening itself. His dark tuxedo fit perfectly. His smile appeared effortless. Beside him stood his fiancée, Sophie Collins, radiant beneath soft lighting and surrounded by admiration. Together they looked like the picture of success. The kind of couple people posted online and described as proof that life always rewarded the right choices. Ryan accepted handshakes and congratulations while occasionally glancing toward the entrance. Not because he was nervous. Because he was waiting. Waiting for one particular guest. "Do you really think she'll come?" one friend asked quietly. Ryan smirked before taking a sip of champagne. "Curiosity always wins," he said. Several people nearby laughed. The comment seemed harmless enough. But everyone understood what he meant. Claire's invitation had not been an act of kindness. It had been a message. A reminder. A carefully delivered opportunity for her to witness everything he had gained after their divorce. The music shifted as another group entered the ballroom. Heads turned automatically. Then turned away again. Not her. Ryan checked his watch. 7:15. The ceremony would begin in less than 15 minutes. Around the room, conversations drifted toward old memories. People remembered when Claire and Ryan had first married. They remembered the small house. The modest lifestyle. The years when Ryan had been unknown. Back then, Claire had been beside him in every photograph. But photographs had a strange way of changing over time. New images replaced old ones. New stories erased old chapters. At least, that was what Ryan believed. A server carrying a silver tray moved through the crowd. Glasses clinked softly. Laughter echoed near the bar. Yet despite the celebration, a quiet tension lingered beneath the surface. It spread through the room like an approaching storm nobody could quite see. Then the main entrance opened. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough for a cool evening breeze to slip inside. One by one, conversations faded. Several guests looked toward the doorway. Then more followed. Ryan noticed the shift immediately. His smile remained frozen as his eyes lifted toward the entrance. Across the ballroom, beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and hundreds of curious eyes, someone had finally arrived. And for the first time that evening, Ryan Bennett stopped looking like the man in control. Claire Whitmore stepped through the doorway as if she had never left the world that once forgot her. The ballroom remained silent for a fraction of a second, but sometimes a single second was long enough to change the atmosphere of an entire room. Conversations stalled halfway through sentences. Champagne glasses paused in midair. Even the musicians seemed softer beneath the weight of sudden attention. Claire stood beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights wearing an emerald green gown that moved effortlessly as she walked. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention, yet somehow every eye found her. Her blonde hair rested neatly against her shoulders. A simple diamond bracelet caught the light as she adjusted the strap of a small evening bag. There was no dramatic entrance. No announcement. No attempt to impress anyone. That was exactly why it worked. Ryan felt his chest tighten. For years, the image he carried of Claire had remained frozen in time. He remembered the exhausted woman sitting at their kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills. He remembered the uncertainty in her eyes during their final months together. He remembered believing that once he walked away, her story would slowly fade into the background. But the woman crossing the ballroom floor looked nothing like the memory he had preserved. Claire moved calmly through the crowd, offering polite smiles to familiar faces. Some guests greeted her cautiously. Others stared openly. A few seemed almost disappointed that she did not appear broken. Ryan noticed every reaction. Sophie followed his gaze and studied Claire for the first time. "That is Claire?" she asked quietly. Ryan swallowed before answering. "Yes." Sophie looked surprised. Not threatened. Simply confused. The stories she had heard over the years described someone entirely different. Near the front row, Claire stopped beside the reserved chair bearing her name. She glanced at the card for a moment. Her fingers touched the edge of the ivory paper. Then she smiled faintly. It was not an angry smile. Not a bitter one. It looked more like the smile of someone who finally understood a joke long after everyone else had stopped laughing. Across the room, several guests watched carefully, waiting for a reaction. They expected discomfort. Embarrassment. Perhaps even regret. Instead, Claire sat down gracefully and crossed her ankles. The emerald fabric settled around her chair like flowing water. The disappointment on a few faces was almost visible. They had prepared themselves for drama. Claire gave them composure. Ryan tried to redirect his attention toward the ceremony preparations, but his eyes kept returning to her. Something felt wrong. Not because Claire had arrived. Because she looked completely at peace. People who carried old wounds usually revealed them somehow. A forced smile. Nervous hands. Restless eyes. Claire showed none of it. She simply observed the room with quiet confidence, as though she belonged there more than anyone else. Then an older guest approached her. A man Ryan recognized immediately from the local business community. The gray-haired executive bent slightly and shook Claire's hand with unmistakable respect. Not sympathy. Respect. Ryan's stomach tightened again. Moments later, another guest joined them. Then another. Each conversation seemed warm. Familiar. Genuine. Claire was not sitting alone anymore. She was becoming the center of a circle Ryan did not understand. And for the first time that evening, a question entered his mind that he could not easily dismiss. What had happened to Claire Whitmore during all the years he had not been watching? Ryan tried to focus on the ceremony schedule, but the room had shifted in a way he could not explain. The attention he expected to receive seemed divided now, flowing quietly toward someone he had long ago stopped thinking about. Guests continued approaching Claire one after another. Some stayed only a minute. Others remained longer, smiling as they spoke with her. What unsettled Ryan was not their friendliness. It was their respect. He recognized several of them. These were people who rarely gave their time away freely. Business owners. Investors. Executives. People who measured every conversation by its value. Yet they approached Claire as if she belonged among them. Sophie noticed it too. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. How does she know all these people? Ryan forced a small laugh. I have no idea. But the answer bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Across the ballroom, Claire listened as an older woman spoke to her. She smiled warmly, then touched the woman's arm before they shared a brief laugh. The gesture seemed natural. Comfortable. Nothing about Claire suggested she felt out of place. If anything, she appeared more relaxed than anyone else in the room. The wedding coordinator stepped toward the front of the ballroom, signaling that the ceremony would begin shortly. Guests slowly returned to their seats. Chairs slid softly against polished marble. Programs rustled. The quartet transitioned into a slower melody. Claire settled back into her seat and folded her hands neatly in her lap. As she looked toward the altar, her expression remained calm. But somewhere beneath the music and the candlelight, memories drifted through her mind. Years earlier, there had been another wedding. A smaller one. No crystal chandeliers. No luxury venue. No designer floral arrangements. Just a modest church outside Columbus, Ohio, with folding chairs and homemade decorations assembled by friends and family. Back then, Ryan had stood nervously at the front of the room wearing a suit that did not fit perfectly. Claire remembered adjusting his tie moments before the ceremony. She remembered how tightly he held her hand afterward. They had very little money then. Their honeymoon had been a weekend road trip in a used sedan with more miles than either of them cared to count. Yet they spent those hours talking about the future as if anything were possible. Ryan dreamed of building a successful company. Claire believed in him completely. During those early years, she worked extra shifts, balanced household expenses, and quietly supported every risk he wanted to take. When his first business proposal failed, she encouraged him to try again. When investors turned him down, she stayed awake late into the night helping him review presentations and budgets. No one saw those moments. Success stories rarely included the people standing behind the spotlight. The music pulled Claire gently back to the present. Around her, guests adjusted their jackets and dresses as the ceremony prepared to begin. She glanced toward the altar. Ryan was speaking with a groomsman now, but his eyes drifted toward her again. Their gazes met briefly. For a second, neither looked away. Ryan expected discomfort. Maybe resentment. Instead, he found something far more confusing. Peace. Claire offered the faintest smile before turning her attention back toward the ceremony. It was a small gesture, done almost instantly. Yet it left Ryan with an uncomfortable realization. The woman he once believed could not move forward without him seemed to have done exactly that. And somehow, that possibility felt heavier than any accusation ever could. As the wedding ceremony began, Claire kept her attention on the front of the room, but her thoughts drifted far beyond the ballroom walls. There had been a time when she could not imagine sitting here without feeling pain. There had been a time when even hearing Ryan's name felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. Yet life had a strange way of changing people when they stopped waiting for someone else to save them. The months after the divorce had been quiet. Not dramatic. Not tragic. Just painfully ordinary. Claire packed her belongings into a rented moving truck and drove nearly 600 miles west with everything she still owned fitting inside a one-bedroom apartment. The apartment sat above a small bakery on a narrow street where delivery trucks arrived before sunrise every morning. The walls were thin. The furniture was second-hand. The air conditioner rattled during the summer. At night, she could hear footsteps from the apartment upstairs. It was not the future she once imagined, but it was hers. During those first months, Claire avoided social media completely. She stopped attending events. She ignored invitations from people who only wanted details about the divorce. To most of the people she once knew, she simply disappeared. Rumors filled the silence she left behind. Some assumed she had moved in with relatives. Others believed she had never recovered from the separation. A few even claimed she was struggling financially. Claire never corrected any of them. Every morning, she walked 3 blocks to a neighborhood coffee shop carrying a notebook and a laptop that was already several years old. She ordered the same black coffee every day and sat beside the front window while the city slowly woke around her. Outside, people rushed to work. Delivery vans passed. Traffic lights changed. Inside, Claire built something new. One page at a time. One idea at a time. One long day after another. There were setbacks. Contracts that never materialized. Partnerships that failed before they started. Weeks when her bank account seemed determined to test her patience. Yet every obstacle taught her something valuable. She stopped measuring progress by speed. She learned to measure it by direction. The woman who once spent her energy helping someone else achieve his dreams slowly began investing that same energy in herself. Seasons passed. Winter became spring. Spring became summer. The city that once felt unfamiliar slowly became home. The owner of the coffee shop learned her name. Local entrepreneurs began recognizing her face. Small opportunities led to larger ones. Claire never announced her victories. She simply continued working. Back in the ballroom, the minister spoke softly while guests listened. Ryan stood beside Sophie beneath elegant floral arrangements, unaware of the memories passing through Claire's mind. The people surrounding him saw a successful man standing at the peak of his life. What none of them understood was that the woman sitting quietly in the front row had spent years rebuilding hers from the ground up. And unlike before, every brick in that foundation belonged to her alone. Long before anyone in the ballroom knew her name again, there was a rainy Thursday morning when Claire nearly gave up. The coffee shop was half empty. Water streaked down the front windows. A cold wind rattled the glass each time someone entered from the street. Claire sat alone at her usual table with a notebook filled with crossed-out ideas and calculations that refused to work. Her coffee had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. The previous week, a potential client had backed out of an important agreement. The month before that, another opportunity had disappeared just as quickly as it arrived. For a moment, she stared at the city outside and wondered if rebuilding a life from scratch was simply taking longer than she expected. Then someone placed a folder on the table beside her. Claire looked up. A man stood there holding an umbrella still wet from the rain. He appeared to be in his early 40s. Well dressed, but not flashy. Confident, but not arrogant. "I believe that belongs to you," he said. Claire looked down. The folder was hers. She had accidentally left it behind 2 days earlier after a meeting. "Thank you," she replied, surprised. The man smiled. "You are welcome." That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, he noticed the financial projections spread across her table. "Interesting numbers," he said casually. Claire raised an eyebrow. Most people would have apologized and looked away. "You can tell that from 3 pages, she asked. The man laughed softly. "Maybe 4 pages. For the first time in days, Claire smiled. His name was Alexander Hayes. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed repeatedly. Sometimes at the coffee shop. Sometimes at local networking events. Sometimes during business seminars where both happened to attend. Neither sought the other out intentionally. Yet their conversations became longer each time they met. Alexander asked thoughtful questions. Claire appreciated that he listened more than he spoke. Most people wanted to discuss success. Alexander seemed more interested in understanding failure. One afternoon, while sitting outside beneath the shade of a large maple tree, he reviewed a business proposal Claire had spent months developing. He read every page carefully before closing the folder. "You know this is good, right?" he asked. Claire looked away. If it was that good, someone would have funded it already. Alexander shook his head. "That is not how opportunity works. Sometimes the right people simply have not seen it yet." The comment stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Unlike others, Alexander never treated her like someone who needed saving. He never offered sympathy for her past. He never asked about Ryan. Instead, he treated Claire as if her future mattered more than her history. That perspective changed something inside her. Back in the ballroom, applause filled the room as the wedding ceremony reached its conclusion. Guests rose to their feet smiling. Cameras flashed. Music swelled beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet several rows back, Ryan noticed Claire sitting quietly with the same calm expression she had worn all evening. He still did not understand why so many influential people seemed drawn to her. What he did not know was that years earlier, on an ordinary rainy morning, a simple conversation over a forgotten folder had become the first step toward a future neither of them could have imagined. Years passed faster than Claire expected. What began as long mornings inside a small coffee shop gradually evolved into conference rooms, client meetings, and opportunities that once felt impossible. Success did not arrive all at once. It arrived quietly. A signed contract. A successful project. A recommendation from a satisfied client. Then another. And another. Each victory seemed small by itself, yet together they formed something substantial. Throughout that journey, Alexander remained a steady presence. Sometimes they worked together. Sometimes months passed with only occasional conversations. Yet whenever Claire faced an important decision, his advice seemed to arrive at exactly the right moment. One autumn afternoon, nearly 5 years after their first meeting, they stood on the rooftop terrace of a downtown office building overlooking the city skyline. The sun reflected from rows of glass towers while traffic moved far below like streams of light. Claire held a report in her hands and stared at the numbers. For several seconds she said nothing. Alexander watched her quietly. "You are smiling," he observed. Claire looked down at the report again. "I think I am in shock." Alexander laughed. "That is a reasonable reaction." The document confirmed what months of work had finally achieved. Her company had completed its largest acquisition to date. A milestone she once considered unreachable. Claire folded the report carefully and looked toward the horizon. For a brief moment she remembered the small apartment above the bakery. The old laptop. The endless cups of coffee. The uncertainty. It all felt like another lifetime. Yet she never forgot it. Success had changed her circumstances, but it had not changed who she was. That evening, as the city lights appeared one by one, Alexander handed her a cream-colored envelope. "This arrived at my office by mistake," he said. Claire recognized the handwriting immediately. Ryan Bennett. She stared at the envelope without opening it. The return address belonged to a luxury event planner. Her stomach tightened slightly. Not from sadness. More from curiosity. Several days later, she finally opened it. Inside was an invitation. Elegant paper. Gold lettering. Formal language. Ryan and Sophie requested the pleasure of her presence at their wedding celebration. Claire read the invitation twice before placing it on her kitchen counter. Then she walked away and continued preparing dinner. She did not answer immediately. The envelope remained there for nearly a week. Friends advised her not to attend. Some thought it was inappropriate. Others believed Ryan wanted attention. Claire listened politely without sharing her thoughts. Deep down, she suspected they were right. The invitation felt less like a gesture of kindness and more like a carefully arranged performance. Yet something about it no longer bothered her. One evening she sat alone beside her living room window watching rain move across the city lights. The invitation rested on the coffee table. She picked it up again and studied the date. Then she smiled softly. Not because she wanted closure. Closure had arrived years earlier. Not because she wanted revenge. Revenge required anger, and anger no longer lived there. Claire simply realized she had nothing left to fear. The next morning, she mailed her response. 3 short words. "I will attend." Back in the ballroom, guests rose from their seats as the ceremony concluded and preparations began for the reception. Ryan greeted friends and relatives while photographers moved through the crowd. Across the room, Claire remained calm beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. None of the guests knew the journey that had brought her there. None of them knew that the woman sitting quietly among them had accepted the invitation for one simple reason. She was no longer returning to her past. She was arriving as the person she had become. The reception unfolded beneath a ceiling of crystal light and polished silver, yet the atmosphere felt different now. The ceremony was over. Formal smiles had relaxed. Conversations flowed more freely. Guests gathered around tall cocktail tables while servers moved through the ballroom carrying trays of sparkling drinks and elegant appetizers. Music drifted softly through the room. From a distance, everything appeared perfect. Up close, however, Ryan sensed something he could not quite define. Every time he looked across the ballroom, Claire seemed to be exactly where attention naturally gathered. Not because she demanded it. Because she never tried to. Near one corner of the reception hall, a group of executives stood speaking with her. Several guests occasionally glanced in her direction before quietly joining the conversation. Sophie noticed it too. People really seem to know her, she said. Ryan forced another smile. Apparently. Yet even as he answered, he found himself watching Claire again. Years ago, she had blended into the background of every room they entered together. Not because she lacked confidence, but because she had always preferred listening over speaking. Tonight felt different. Claire was still the same woman in many ways. Calm. Reserved. Thoughtful. Yet there was a quiet certainty surrounding her now. The kind that could not be purchased. The kind earned through experience. As dinner approached, guests began moving toward assigned tables. Claire's seat was surprisingly close to the head table. Ryan had arranged it that way himself. At the time, the decision felt clever. He imagined her spending the evening watching him celebrate a future that no longer included her. Now he was beginning to regret the placement. From her seat, Claire could see the entire ballroom. More importantly, the entire ballroom could see her. The emerald gown caught the warm glow of candlelight as she settled comfortably into her chair. Conversations continued around her. Laughter rose and faded. Yet she remained completely at ease. A few tables away, two women quietly discussed her. "That is Claire Whitmore," one whispered. "I barely recognized her." The other nodded. "She looks incredible." Claire overheard the comment but offered no reaction. Compliments no longer carried the same weight they once did. She had spent too many years learning that appearances often revealed very little about a person's life. Then something unexpected happened. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone to the reception. As part of the evening program, several notable guests would be acknowledged for supporting charitable initiatives connected to the event. The announcement seemed routine. Until one of the names appeared on the large projection screen behind him. Claire Whitmore. A ripple moved through the room. Heads turned almost instantly. Ryan stared at the screen in confusion. Sophie looked equally surprised. Claire herself appeared calm. She simply looked toward the stage as the presenter continued speaking. "Over the past 3 years," he said, "her foundation has funded entrepreneurship programs across multiple states and helped hundreds of small business owners launch new ventures." Murmurs spread through the ballroom. People exchanged curious glances. Several guests began searching online from their phones. Others looked toward Claire with growing interest. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Foundation. Multiple states. Entrepreneurship programs. None of this matched the story he believed he knew. Then the presenter smiled. "We are honored to have her with us this evening." Applause filled the ballroom. Not polite applause. Genuine applause. Claire acknowledged it with a small nod before returning her attention to the stage. She did not stand. She did not make a speech. She did not seek recognition. And somehow that made the moment even more powerful. Across the room, Ryan sat perfectly still. For the first time all evening, he began to understand that the woman he invited here was not the woman who had left his life years ago. And the deeper realization was even harder to ignore. Everyone else seemed to know it before he did. The applause gradually faded, but the mood inside the ballroom had changed. What began as a celebration centered around Ryan and Sophie now carried a second story moving quietly beneath the surface. Guests continued checking their phones. Some searched for information about Claire's foundation. Others discovered articles mentioning business ventures, charitable initiatives, and partnerships spanning several states. Every new detail seemed to generate another question. Ryan noticed the shift immediately. For years, he had been accustomed to controlling the narrative whenever Claire's name appeared. Tonight, however, the narrative belonged to someone else. Dinner service continued. Beneath warm candlelight. Crystal glasses reflected soft gold across the tables. Conversations drifted from weddings to business, from family stories to future plans. Yet no matter where Ryan looked, Claire seemed connected to discussions taking place throughout the room. Then another unexpected moment arrived. Near the center of the ballroom, a distinguished man entered through a side entrance accompanied by several executives. His arrival immediately attracted attention from guests who recognized him. Conversations paused. A few people even stood to greet him. Ryan recognized the face as well. Alexander Hayes. The founder and chairman of one of the fastest-growing investment groups in the country. Ryan had followed his business success for years. Several months earlier, Ryan's own company had unsuccessfully attempted to secure a meeting with Alexander's organization regarding a potential partnership. The request had never moved beyond preliminary discussions. Now Alexander was walking directly into the reception. Sophie noticed Ryan's expression. "You know him?" she asked. Ryan nodded slowly. "Everyone in business knows who he is." Across the ballroom, Alexander exchanged greetings with several guests before his eyes settled on Claire. His face immediately brightened. Not with professional courtesy. With genuine warmth. Claire rose from her seat as he approached. The two shared a brief embrace before continuing their conversation. The reaction throughout the room was subtle but unmistakable. More heads turned. More questions surfaced. Ryan stared in disbelief. The connection seemed far closer than he expected. Alexander pulled out the chair beside Claire and joined her table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Throughout dinner, executives approached their table repeatedly. Some greeted Alexander. Others sought Claire's opinion directly. Several appeared to know both of them well. Ryan could no longer focus on the conversations happening around him. Something important was becoming impossible to ignore. Later in the evening, while guests enjoyed dessert, one of Ryan's business associates quietly approached his table. "I had no idea you knew." "Claire Whitmore," the man said. Ryan hesitated. "We were married years ago." The associate blinked in surprise. "Seriously?" Ryan nodded. The man shook his head slowly. "That is incredible." There was a brief pause before he added something that made Ryan's stomach tighten. "Her company has become one of Alexander Hayes' largest strategic partners. They have worked together on several major acquisitions over the last few years." Ryan stared at him. "Her company?" "Of course." The associate looked confused. "You did not know?" Ryan did not answer immediately. Around the ballroom, music played softly while guests laughed and celebrated. Yet the room suddenly felt different. Piece by piece, a picture was forming. Claire had not simply recovered after the divorce. She had built something extraordinary. And Alexander Hayes was not merely an acquaintance who happened to attend the wedding. He was one of the most influential figures in her professional world. Across the room, Claire listened as Alexander spoke about an upcoming project. She smiled and replied calmly. Neither seemed aware of the effect their presence was having. Or perhaps they simply did not care. For the first time that evening, Ryan understood a truth that no amount of confidence could erase. The woman he once believed had lost everything had quietly created a life larger than anything he had ever imagined. The evening slowly approached its final hours. Music floated through the ballroom while guests filled the dance floor beneath thousands of tiny lights suspended across the ceiling like stars. Laughter echoed from every corner of the room. Glasses clinked. Conversations blended together into a warm hum of celebration. Yet for Ryan, the night no longer felt the way he imagined it would. Earlier, he believed this wedding would mark a triumphant chapter in his life. Instead, it had become a reminder that time changed people in ways no one could predict. Across the ballroom, Claire stood beside Alexander near a large window overlooking the city skyline. The lights from downtown stretched for miles into the distance. Together they spoke quietly, occasionally smiling as guests approached to greet them. There was no grand announcement. No dramatic revelation. Nothing designed to impress anyone. And perhaps that was what impressed people most. Confidence no longer needed an audience. Ryan watched from a distance. For a moment, memories returned unexpectedly. A small apartment. Late nights planning future goals. Conversations about dreams neither of them could afford yet. He remembered how fiercely Claire believed in possibilities. Back then, he had mistaken her support for certainty. He assumed it would always be there. Standing inside the ballroom years later, he finally understood something he should have recognized long ago. The strength he admired in himself had often been strengthened by the person standing beside him. Nearby, Sophie noticed his expression. She followed his gaze toward Claire and Alexander before gently touching his arm. Ryan looked back at her and managed a smile. Sophie smiled in return. The moment passed quietly. Not every realization required words. Near midnight, guests gradually began saying their goodbyes. Valet attendants moved cars toward the entrance. Families gathered coats and purses. The celebration that had taken months to plan was slowly coming to an end. Claire retrieved her evening bag and thanked several guests who stopped to speak with her. Many wanted future meetings. Others wanted photographs. She accepted each interaction graciously before preparing to leave. Then Ryan approached her. The distance between them felt strangely unfamiliar. Years earlier they had shared an entire life. Now they stood like two people connected only by memory. "Thank you for coming," he said. Claire looked at him for a moment. Her expression remained calm. "Congratulations, Ryan," she replied. "I wish you both happiness." Simple words. Honest words. Nothing more. Ryan nodded slowly. He wanted to say something else. Perhaps an apology. Perhaps a question. Perhaps an acknowledgement of everything he now understood too late. Yet none of those words seemed necessary. Claire had already moved beyond the place where explanations mattered. Alexander joined her moments later. Ryan extended his hand. Alexander shook it politely. No tension. No competition. Just quiet respect. Then Claire and Alexander walked toward the exit together. The ballroom lights reflected softly against the marble floor as they crossed the room. Conversations continued behind them. Music played on. Life moved forward. At the entrance, Claire paused briefly and looked back one final time. Not at Ryan. Not at the wedding. At the room itself. The room where she had once been expected to feel small. Then she smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that comes only when peace has fully replaced regret. Outside, the cool night air welcomed them as city lights shimmered across the horizon. The doors closed gently behind them. Inside, the celebration continued. Outside, a new chapter waited. Claire never became successful to prove anyone wrong. She became successful because she finally learned that her worth had never depended on someone else's ability to see it. And as she disappeared into the glow of the city beside the people who valued her for who she had become, the greatest victory of all remained beautifully silent. She did not win him back. She won herself.